whenever like something bad happens, it's like, well, we didn't know. They know. They've created this system, and the system is working exactly how they want it to maximize shareholder value.
Welcome back to The Tea. I'm your host, Myriam François. Before we dive in, I want to say a huge thank you for coming on this journey with us. Our goal with The Tea is to share knowledge that can translate to people power. And your support is quite literally what makes this show possible. So if you love what we do, hit subscribe now. And if you want ad-free episodes, exclusive content, and to help shape future shows, you can also join our Patreon, your very own resistance community. The link's in our bio. Right now, as you scroll, the global fashion industry is producing over 100 billion garments every year. That's 10 times more clothes than there are people on the planet. In the UK alone, we spend £160 billion annually on clothing, with the average person buying 60% more than they did just 15 years ago. Overconsumption is no longer just a habit, it's an engineered obsession. In this attention economy, millennials and Gen Z are pushed to monetize our identities, and more than ever, our self-worth is tangled up in aesthetics and trends. Our habits are carefully shaped by algorithms, and influencer content is designed to keep us consuming faster and without thinking. Just think about how easy it is to click buy from your phone. But the cost is devastating. Fast fashion accounts for 10% of global carbon emissions and is a primary driver of what the UN recently declared an era of global water bankruptcy. Producing a single cotton t-shirt can require 2,700 litres of water, yet critical water systems are now past the point of restoration. I know what you're thinking. It's okay, I recycle. Well, guess what? Less than 1% of all clothing is actually recycled. The rest is dumped or burned in countries like Ghana. If the panopticon of our digital lives is designed to make us buy incessantly, can ethical consumption even exist? Why are we obsessed with buying stuff? And who really pays the price for our convenience? Today, we're joined by Aja Barber, writer, stylist, and sustainability consultant, whose work has fundamentally shifted the global conversation on fashion. Her debut book, Consumed, was named a Book of the Year by both The Guardian and The Times. In it, Aja dismantles the industry and asks whether fast fashion is really just colonialism 2.0 dressed up as affordable style. Aja, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you for being with us. So before we get into it, tell me a little bit about you and your childhood and what led you to do the kind of work that you do today. What was the journey?
Yeah, so I grew up outside of the Washington, D.C. area, which is very affluent, but I grew up lower middle class, and I was the perfect, fast fashion consumer because I grew up wearing my sister's hand-me-downs, which she's 5 years older than me. And in the 80s and 90s, you could definitely tell a difference between the styles. So I grew up feeling like I never had the right clothing. So the minute I had disposable income from part-time jobs, babysitting, stuff like that, I was off to the races. And as someone who's also really curious about the things that are made and how things are made, there was always something about the fashion industry where I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand what was going on behind the scenes, literally. And I'm also into crafts and stuff. So I would start, crafting and figuring out things. And at one point, there just became a moment where I realized that I couldn't make sense of how clothing could be made for the price points that it was being sold at when I knew what materials cost, when I knew what the labor took that went into it. And that led me down a rabbit hole. And at the same time, the internet was also picking up. And so I was noticing that clothing was being sold faster and everyone I knew was buying more and more and more of it. And we were all sort of doing this guilt-free because ignorance is bliss. But I knew deep down inside that there was something that was a little bit off about the system. So straight into the rabbit hole I went, and here we are today.
Okay, so before we get into that more, I want to ask you, obviously, I can't not, as an American in London, watching what's going on in the US right now, any thoughts you want to share about what's going on?
I have always known that the US is essentially, in many ways, a police state. I know this as a Black person. I know this as a ethnic minority that came of age in my 20s, basically, understanding why things like Black Lives Matter needed to exist. And so seeing what is happening to everyday citizens, I think there are people that think that their privilege will insulate them from these systems. But unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people are learning the very hard way. And it's really hard to watch. It's really, really hard to watch. I wish that I had, better advice on what's going on in the US, but I think that we really, really, really need to start organizing. And that can look like a lot of things. And the reason I actually talk about consumerism and these systems is because I find that when people feel empowered in smaller systems, things like how we buy our clothing, it actually really like pushes people. It's kind of a gateway, you know?
Well, to that point, I was going to say, what do you say to people who are, watching the ICE raids, watching the, kidnapping of the Venezuelan president and all the rest of the horrors in Gaza and elsewhere, and who might say, fashion and overconsumption is pretty low down my list of priorities. Like, why is this conversation urgent, Aja?
All of these systems are tied together. Our oppression is directly linked to the person who is making your clothes. If you think that we are so different, you really don't understand how these systems work and who holds the power. And quite frankly, it's none of us. So we have to start caring about all of us.
So you mentioned that, growing up, you didn't necessarily feel like you could access fashion, and then suddenly you can access fashion. What were some of the things that you discovered as you started to, unravel the industry that led you to think, oh, actually, there's like an urgent conversation that I need to lead here?
And it wasn't one moment, it was a few moments. Like one summer, I volunteered in a charity shop in Northern Virginia, where I'm from. And one of the things that really shocked me was just the sheer amount. I would spend my days going through trash bags full of clothing. We would only be able to sell less than 10% of it. Like we were not selling all that clothing. And I would come back and it would be replenished. The mountain would be back. And I'm someone where I'm good at estimating and sort of like thinking about things from grand system. And I was thinking, we are not that unique, right? That we're one of 25,000 charity shops in the United States. If every charity shop is getting this amount of donations, what is going on? And there was a moment where I was like, just feel like this might be an ecological disaster. And then, of course, later on down the line, I started to get the numbers from places like, you know, Ghana and Kenya, Uganda, places in the global south where they were like, hey, these clothing imports are actually really becoming a problem for us. And then I was like, I knew it was an ecological disaster.
And you mentioned that, the oppression of people in the global south is connected to, the oppression of people here in the global north. But how does that connection actually work to your mind? And I ask because obviously some people might say, well, actually, the oppression of the people in the global south on clothing is in service to people in the global north, because actually it means I can buy a $5 t-shirt, whatever, if I'm a low wage worker, that I can now afford to buy things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So how exactly do you see the connection between those oppressions?
We are so much closer to the people that are working in the supply chain in the global south than we are to the billionaire at the top of the corporation. This is the problem, the temporarily embarrassed millionaire problem, right? People think that, like, oh, it's okay if these people are abused, but don't you think that that same corporation that is okay with abusing the people making the clothing is totally going to be okay with abusing the people that work in the stores, the people that work in the supply chain in the global north, and also abusing our entire planet, which we all, by the way, have to share? Like the water that we pollute yesterday in another country will eventually wash up on our shores. We're not getting out of this, you know? And so this idea that we are not connected is just so backwards. But I think that the internet has allowed us to really isolate ourselves in this weird way and sort of have a whole like they versus us. But additionally, if you're an ethnic minority, you need to understand it is your homeland that's being trashed, right? When we look at the beginning of the system, the raw materials are being raided from a country in the global south who is not getting paid a fair wage. No one's making good money off of giving these raw resources to the fashion industry, unless it's like a fair trade sort of thing, which is not the largest part of the system, unfortunately. So you've got the raw materials where someone's being exploited. You have the supply chain where people are definitely being exploited. Those factories, guess where they are? They're in countries in the global south, like Indonesia, where entire rivers, like the Citarum, is being completely polluted. And that is a water supply for so many people who now, farmers can't sell their rice anymore because the rice is being polluted. And it's all the factory runoffs from the same factories that are making our clothes. So, okay, you've got labor exploitation, resource exploitation, environmental exploitation. The clothing comes to us. We think, ooh, we're so rich. We're the consumer. I can buy like 60 items of clothing a year. Oh, I feel wealthy, except it doesn't actually make us feel good. No one's like, once people slow down and get out of this buying habit, no one goes, oh, you know what? I really miss it. I really miss the impulse purchases. I really miss the feeling of lack. I really miss having to squeeze myself into clothing that isn't made to fit me. I really, really miss clothing stores that smell like formaldehyde and stuff that falls apart. And then I buy something else. No one ever says that. So we go through this clothing very quickly because it's not meant to be made to last us a long time, unfortunately. That is how you keep people buying, planned obsolescence. And then when we are done, we donate our clothing. So we give it to various charities, and they are getting so much clothing because, again, 100 billion garments, that they are not selling all of that. So some of that is going to get sold. Some of it is going to get landfilled. And landfills are definitely an environmental justice issue because the work of Dr. Robert Bullard pointed out that most landfills in the United States are always going to be located near the Black and brown neighborhoods. So there you go. The landfills are not ending up in High Street, Kensington. So if your clothing is landfilled, it's going to be pollution for someone in the global north. Or if it gets shipped to the global south, they are not going to be able to handle the influx of clothing that is showing up there. Like in Ghana, it has filled up the municipal dump 10 years ahead of schedule. So we are effectively making the person of Ghana pay for this waste system, or it ends up in the ocean, polluting the beaches, in neighborhoods. And so from start to finish, I would say this system of rapid consumption really, really, really dumps on marginalized people in a way that I think a lot of people don't understand.
So interestingly, clothing, fashion connected to, for sure, environmental, political issues,
yes,
and labor exploitation issues. Do you also see there being a sort of social dimension that we can explore from a political angle? And let me be a bit more precise with that. So on TikTok and social media, we're seeing a lot of people that are connecting the current rise of fascism, which is arguably now a kind of global issue, to certain fashion and beauty trends. So things like the trad wife, the prairie dress, the milkmaid aesthetic, which seem to push kind of a very conservative idea about gender roles and family. You might recall Melania Trump's inauguration outfit, which many people thought was like a nod to The Handmaid's Tale, the outfit of the kind of higher class women in that. So for people who might not think that clothing is political, can you kind of connect that, the ways in which trends are connected to kind of wider political issues that are happening?
If you look at the entire spectrum of fashion history, clothing has always been linked to politics. Everything from like denim, for instance, denim linked to like the wardrobe of the worker, the everyman. So there's so many different ways that you can look at clothing from a political standpoint, but we can also get into the geopolitics of it. So we're looking at a world where water wars are in our future. If you have all of these corporations that are overproducing clothing, including like cotton clothing, and they are, emptying lakes to water these cotton crops so they can keep us buying, and we're looking at a future where people are fighting over water, like we can tie it to so many different political issues. And I think people are quick to sort of, put down the fashion industry as like women's stuff and frivolous and silly. But I think that that's a very ignorant standpoint to come from when you look at the fact that The fashion industry accounts for like the GDP of some countries, you know. We write it off because I think the world always, for lack of a better word, shits on things it associates with women. But every single person you know wears clothing. And every person that thinks that like they're above this, the reason you are wearing the t-shirt that you picked out today, there's some reason for it. There's a reason, I mean, not to get too like, you know, fictional with it, but it's that whole speech from The Devil Wears Prada where she's talking about, you know, blue and how this was picked out for fashion editors by fashion editors so that you could pick it out of a bargain bin and say that it doesn't matter to you. But all of this stuff matters. It's connected to so many different things. I just wish that people would actually take it seriously, because I think when you start to really dive into it and look at it from different positions, it can actually be really fascinating and interesting. And there's parts of the fashion industry that I don't want to lose, like the craft of it. And that's another thing. If all of us are sort of leaning into like this fast consumption, we are losing a history of artistry. And like, I don't want to see that happen.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because for me, the sort of commodification of clothing, which I associate as a non-specialist with the fashion industry, I see as sort of flattening identities, right? So now wherever you go in the world, I'm not going to name the big brands, but you could find people wearing exactly the same outfits. Whereas, you know, historically, we would have been wearing clothing that was very similar to what our grandmothers would have been wearing. Like, we would have put our own little twist on it, obviously, because every generation does that. But we would have been in a lineage and there would have been a continuity of identity. And I just wanted to ask you about what's lost when we tend to think of, purchasing clothes as gaining. We're gaining new clothes, we're gaining new style, whatever it may be. But also, what are we losing?
Yeah, it's really sad how, like, when you go to European cities, it is the same companies on every high street now. But we're losing, you know, individualism, but on a grand scheme of things, we're losing a competitive market. Like when you have the same five corporations, you know, controlling a large percentage of an industry, what you really lose is collective bargaining. You lose all sorts of like really interesting cultural identities that could be added to the fashion industry. Everything becomes extremely watered down, extremely beige, you know, just very flattened. But I think on the grand scheme of things, we're losing collective bargaining and workers' rights, because when it's just five corporations in a trench coat controlling an industry, good luck unionizing.
I was going to ask you about the connection to identity, because obviously a lot of what we're sold is to sell us an identity, right? We're not just being sold clothes, we're being sold an idea of who we are. But that idea of who we are and that clothing that's associated with it is there to subsume an older version of who we are that's actually more rooted and more connected to who we are in terms of the legacy and tradition of our ancestors.
Not just that, but I feel like culturally we also lose like interesting subgenres and whatnot. Like I remember when I was like younger, you know, you had people that were like punks and it had a real do-it-yourself culture. I mean, we still have punks, obviously. They haven't gone anywhere. But I think the commodification of every type of culture leads to an extreme watering down of not just culture, but also ideas. And it's the same way with how all of the clothing that has been flooded into markets in Ghana has really taken away from local creators and designers and traditional wear. You know, that has definitely ruined the market there, and it makes it harder for people who make clothing in that country to actually sell their clothing at a fair wage.
Now, in your book, you talk about the connection, obviously, between the fashion industry and colonialism. For people for whom that connection may not be entirely clear, can you just lay that out for us?
If you look at the maps of yesteryear and the maps of today and the colonialist trade lines, they look pretty much identical today. Not much has changed. The resources are still coming from the global south, going into systems in the global north, which make countries in the global north richer and make countries in the global south poorer. But if you really want to like think about how it's impacted like just American history, when we learn about slavery, we learn about cotton as a disconnected thing. Nobody ever really connects it to the fashion industry. But without chattel slavery, I don't think that the Industrial Revolution would have happened in the same way. And the Industrial Revolution is definitely part of why we have the fashion industry we have today. A lot of inventions came out of that time period so that cotton could be processed quicker, faster, and clothing could be made cheaper, basically.
What would you say to somebody who says, well, how can you compare, a system where people were, enslaved and forced to work on plantations, where they were, owned by, individuals or companies even, with, sure, terrible wages, but obviously people who are making a living off of that in their home country?
Many people are not making a living in their home countries. And if you look at the Rana Plaza collapse that happened in 2013, some of those workers were locked in. It's not that different from the Triangle Shirtwaist disaster, which happened in the US, which was a huge catalyst for workers' rights in the US. But all we really did was outsource the problem somewhere else.
Just remind us what happened in that collapse for people who might not be familiar.
It was mostly women, I want to say Jewish and Italian women, who were working in a factory in New York, which today the location is part of NYU's campus. And they had been locked in the factory. The factory caught on fire and many women perished, sadly. And so it was a huge catalyst for workers' rights in the US. But we have that same thing happening in the global South. With regularity, it just doesn't make front page news. And it should.
Now, global clothing sales have more than doubled over the past 20 years. I'm pretty sure the global population hasn't more than doubled.
Yeah.
That's far outpacing global economic growth. How do you explain these numbers?
Exploitation at every level, from the materials that are bought to the person who is making the clothing. It's called the race to the bottom. And the race to the bottom happens in various countries because whenever workers start to get rights or start to get organized, then these major companies that claim that they don't know what's happening in these factories, because that's always the line whenever something bad happens, it's well, we didn't know. They know because they push something called the race to the bottom. They'll have an order of 100,000 pairs of jeans. They'll go to one factory and say, can you make us these pairs of jeans for this amount per pair? And the factory will say, yeah, I think we can do it for that amount. It'll be a push, but whatever. And then they'll go to another factory and say, can you do it for cheaper? And that factory will say, yeah, we can. And then they'll just play people against each other until somebody agrees to this bottom of the barrel price. And when that happens, what is also happening behind the scenes is that some of that order is going to get outsourced to another factory. And that is where you have children working. And nobody wants to say that, oh, we didn't know. But you know how fast human hands can work. You know that it's not magical fairies making the clothing. So when these corporations say that they don't know, they absolutely know. They've created this system, and the system is working exactly how they want it to maximize shareholder value.
But why do we feel this kind of incessant need to consume? Because you could argue that, if we weren't purchasing, then they wouldn't be producing as much. What is it with us that's making us buy continuously?
It's our entire culture. I definitely think that social media has definitely aided in it. The speed up that we've seen with the consuming of garments goes hand in hand with social media. If you look at the timeline, pretty identical stuff happening. But it's also our culture. And I think as we start to feel more and more powerless in these systems, people are kind of cool, I guess I'll buy a dress. When you look at young people, I don't know when the job market has been considered good since I graduated from school, and I graduated almost 20 years ago. So job market sucks. People can't buy houses. In the US, you mostly can't have healthcare unless you have a job. People really can't afford to live. And it almost feels like the only thing people feel like they can do is buy stuff. And so I feel like the things that are really important and really matter, and those social safety nets that we all love, even though some people think that we shouldn't have them, which is ridiculous, that stuff is going away. but instead we're being flooded with cheap, accessible goods that are made by the exploitation of someone else. So it's like, hey, you can't have healthcare, but you can have a shopping spree at H&M.
So it's a pacifier, right? Our shopping habits are like a pacifier when we live in a world that is so riddled with inequality
And exploitation.
Exploitation. I'm sure you've come across Naomi Klein's book, No Logo.
I love Naomi Klein.
She argues that we don't actually have free choice, right? The book is all about this idea that billionaires are using such aggressive marketing and the psychological hit of a low cost price tag to, people who are trapped in the sort of working class cycle of poverty is that as we were just discussing, this kind of buying to feel better loop that we're in. If our desire to buy a £5 t-shirt is effectively a manufactured addiction designed to alleviate the extreme strain of our economic circumstances, how do we get people to stop buying as much? Isn't it like asking an addict to stop using their drug of choice?
Yeah, and I think that it starts really young. I'm hearing lots of talks about maybe banning social media for kids under the age of 16. I'm pro that because I think social media is a lot of this, but I also think that we need to get education about consumerism, about these systems, about credit card debt into schools. We cannot be sending these kids out into the world and being like, buy now, when we know that all of these predatory systems exist. I remember reading about Klarna during lockdown and being like, I don't know about this. This doesn't look good. I'm not feeling it. And then, of course, a New York Times article came out just recently that was like, here's how Klarna is getting young people into debt. And I'm like, I don't like being right about some things. And I think that in order to really get the next generation prepped and understanding that these systems are out there, we've got to get this into the school system.
Got to start early.
Yes.
So we can start with younger people and sort of maybe, if this legislation passes, help them avoid the first few years of kind of being hooked in. But how can individuals, who are past, let's say, 18, if such a law were to pass, how can individuals detach importance from what we own when so much of modern status and influence is based on that?
That's a tough one. I think we have to change our value systems within ourselves. That's really it. And sometimes it's like it is definitely a lifestyle change. And it's hard to get out of that sometimes when you're really surrounded by it. Like there has to be a moment where you look around and realize, is this stuff bringing you joy? And I think we know that it's not bringing us joy. Because one of the things I definitely remember in London during lockdown was people dumping things on the street, particularly outside of charity shops, and it becoming a huge problem because everyone's home in their flat or house or whatever. And suddenly people are feeling really claustrophobic by their stuff. It's not feeling so good anymore to have all of the things. And I think that sometimes we really have to sit with ourselves and ask ourselves, is this making me happy?
So interestingly, I think that having stuff doesn't make us happy. And I think we all know that. But I think what we can't get around is that click.
The marketing.
That click, even on your phone, when you've made that, but ding. I live for that sound. It's cracked me. It's so bad how well they've engineered these things.
And they've really timed it. There's been so much science that goes into getting you to check out from the minute you put it in your shopping cart. How do we shorten that time period between the minute they put it in the shopping cart to the minute we have their money? How do we make them?
It feels instantaneous to me now. It's
all the cookies. You look at something online and then it just follows you around the internet until you buy it, so it leaves you alone. Yeah.
Yes, we are harassed to buy. I mean, it's a real issue. When you released your book in 2021, the conversation was very focused on individual unlearning. Now, with 150 billion items being produced annually, the scale of the crisis seems to have outpaced individual action. Has your perspective on the solutions changed at all since you wrote the book?
No. I think that people love the conversation about it's not on the individual, it's on the corporation. Well, yeah, obviously. who is going to regulate a system if we as individuals do not change ourselves a little bit? What lawmaker is going to be like, you know what? All my constituents, they love Shein and Timu, so I think I'm going to regulate them. Like, that'll get me reelected. I still think that we have to start unlearning for ourselves before we can change anything. It's never going to happen. Show me a movement where individuals were not good and mad and tired of something and it actually changed. Show me a movement where we just left it up to the corporations and said, oh, they'll work it out for themselves. It's never going to happen. So, yeah, unfortunately, like, this is one of those things where it is on us. But again, I think it's a gateway. I think when you start to care about the worker who makes your clothing, the person who picks your fruits and veg, it's a gateway to a lot of other bigger movements. I don't know a single person who doesn't care about this issue, who isn't aligned with other issues, from Palestine to workers' rights all over the world. And we know that that is like crucial. Like, it isn't just about fast fashion, it's about Amazon, which employs a large percentage of the United States and doesn't pay fair wages for most people. You know, it's about Walmart, again, one of the world's biggest employers, underpays all of its workers. So it's a gateway. You start caring about who makes your jeans, and before you know it, you're unionizing.
So let me ask you this, and because we're told Gen Z is the most conscious generation in history. 62% say they prefer sustainable brands, and 73% claim that they'll pay more for ethics. But yet, Shein is currently the most popular shopping site for Gen Z in America, with a valuation peaking at $100 billion nearly, and churning out up to 10,000 new designs every single day. If the demand is for ethics, why is the reality a race to the bottom? If you're enjoying the show, why not join our Patreon community? The Tea is more than just a YouTube show. It's a space to foster meaningful change together at a time of violent turbulence and dizzying change. Becoming a Patreon means you get exclusive content and the chance to shape the show. So join us now, link in our bio.
Unfortunately, again, I feel like when you don't have the social safety nets that people need, they're going to turn to other things, right? And I do feel like everybody says that they want these things, but is everybody willing to like sacrifice a little bit on their own part to actually have these better systems? And I feel like sometimes in our society, quite often, our actions do not match up with our words.
Evidently not, because if you've polled these young people, they all say the same thing. And I think we all do, right?
I also think there's a lack of education. I still feel like the messaging is, every day I get someone on social media that's like, wow, I had no idea. I thought, well, I recycle, da 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 da. And then I read your book and I realized, okay, I can't shop in any of these stores anymore. I just have to like wear what's in my wardrobe, and that's okay. And that's the first step. And that's the step that people don't want to take because, again, not using the pacifier doesn't feel good, you know? But that is an easy step that everyone can take that doesn't cost you anything to just wear and repair your clothing.
Let me ask you about the personal carbon footprint. So that's a concept that was famously popularized by BP to shift the blame from climate change onto the individual, really.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, totally.
Isn't the fashion industry now doing exactly the same thing? We're told the crisis is our fault for buying like a $5 t-shirt, but the system is pumping 150 billion garments a year. Are we being gaslit into a state of kind of shame-induced paralysis where we can't really do anything else but kind of acquiesce publicly to what we know is right? You know, those of us who are aware of the numbers, we're like, yeah, of course it's wrong. But like secretly, we're like, well, I can't really afford to buy the expensive clothes, so let me just buy the cheap thing.
But do you have to buy the expensive clothes, or can you wear the clothes in your wardrobe? Again, we like the buying. The buying feels good. We have been taught to buy. We have been trained to buy. It's that unpacking that people don't want to do. And I remember it for myself. I remember having this really sad thought where I knew I was like, I got to break up with fast fashion. And I remember having this really sad moment where I was like, if I'm not buying these things, who will I be? And that was when I was like, girl, you got to stop. Like, what are you talking about? Your identity is not tied to consumerism. So, yeah, the first step is to just stop buying stuff, stop buying things new, stop buying things you don't need, stop participating in little treat culture. It's not a little treat if someone was exploited to make it. Um, and redefine what your values are. And for a lot of people, they could stop buying clothing this year and maybe not buy something for years. Like that, we have pretty full wardrobes, evidently, you know? And so there's this idea that we just have to keep consuming no matter what. And yeah, there will be a time when you need something, right? The majority of what I buy now is secondhand. I do not buy new stuff unless it is specifically a company I want to support. So it means that I don't rush to buy things. I might, you know, oh, I really like that brand of jeans. I'll wait and wait and wait until it pops up on Vinted or eBay or whatever. But I don't need it today or tomorrow. And everything that you've ever wanted from the fashion industry already exists on Earth. There is so much clothing out there, and that can make your style really unique because one thing that we've talked about is that, like, we're all starting to look like clones of each other. And if you're shopping the high street, not getting anything original. But if you know, start to really take an interest in, like, I really like this designer's collections from the 90s, you will be surprised what you can find online. Like, and for very little money. I've gotten things off of the runway, jackets that cost 2 grand for 80 bucks, not pounds, bucks. That's how much a jacket costs in H&M from like their top line collection. So I just think we've got to untrain ourselves from the system and like this idea that we need these things. Let's challenge it. Like you need food, you need fresh fruits and vegetables, you need clean water, you need housing from the elements, you need healthcare, right? Do you actually need a dress to go out on the weekend? Do you need a new dress for that wedding that you've been to where nobody has seen any of the dresses in your closet? What do we actually need? And that's really what people don't want to look at too hard. Like, need versus want. It's time to make some decisions here.
So on that point, this idea of identity, which we kind of keep coming back to, it sounds like you're saying that actually also when you stop buying regularly, you kind of realign your values and perhaps you discover another side of your identity that's rooted in something maybe more profound than what you're being sold as the meaning of your identity based on aesthetic. And I do think about this a lot for us as women. Because for us in particular, we're constantly bombarded with the notion that our value is based on our aesthetic.
Yes.
And because our value is based on our aesthetic, we spend a huge amount of money on it, right? Whether it's on our hair, on our nails, on our clothes, or whatever else. But I also, as somebody who, you know, subscribes to revolutionary politics and ideals, recognize that when you allow that to define you, you ignore more kind of profound moral callings. So do you think there's actually revolutionary potential in unsubscribing?
Absolutely. Like I said, it's a gateway. It really is. And you also start to realize how much you have. Like when you're constantly buying, you're not keeping track of like what's already in the wardrobe. I have not bought makeup in years. Now, people will say, oh, some of that stuff goes bad. And that's true. I read up on like what expires, what you need to throw away. I have not project panned anything because I don't actually wear that much makeup. So did I need to be like, ooh, I really want this new lipstick that everyone's talking about? No, I never needed it because I probably won't run out of makeup in like maybe 10 years' time. Maybe, you know? And so I think this constant cycle of consumerism, one, we're not thinking about our values, and two, we're not even thinking about how much we have. Like when you stopped, obviously during lockdown for a lot of people, when you stopped, you were just like, oh my God, my house is full of crap. I've got to get rid of some of this. And then people started buying again because they were bored or scared or whatever.
Say, I feel like a lot of people did buy in lockdown as
totally.
well.
That was when Shein shot up. And like, I remember seeing the rise of Shein because Shein as a company had actually existed for years, but they hadn't had success until TikTok. So I've been on Pinterest since the beginning. And I remember Shein being marketed to me on Pinterest. They used to be called She Inside. So people call it Sheen. It's actually Shein because it's short for that. They used to sell wedding dresses and then they kind of expanded, but they never had the success until TikTok. And what happened during lockdown was that young people who were bored, scared, unsure of what was happening, feeling insecure, not able to see their friends, were getting on TikTok and outdoing each other with hauls. It was one of those things where it was like, I bought $500 worth of stuff on Shein. Let's open it. And it would be this massive box that would be the size that like a laundry machine would come in. And then they dump it out. And Shein haul began to trend. And I think that without that whole time period, I still think that obviously Shein would figure out a way. But that was the moment it really took off, in my opinion.
Well, it's funny you mentioned TikTok there because I was going to ask you about like the rise of sort of sustainability influencers, and obviously the influencer economy is a huge part of what drives our shopping habits. I was just reading that fashion industry is the second largest consumer of fossil fuel derived synthetics, with polyester alone consuming over 1% of the world's supply. But we're also seeing kind of sustainable influencers promoting so-called conscious products, but that are still promoting purchasing, right?
No, I just feel like it's been rebranded. Like, I feel like sustainability was a thing that was like a buzzword, and obviously it matters to me. But on the internet, it definitely felt like a buzzword. And now it's kind of been rebranded under like the self optimization umbrella. And so instead of people talking about caring about the planet and other people, they're like, don't waste your money on that polyester crap, which yes and no. I wish that maybe there would be room for caring about other people in that message, but like this huge materials conversation that's happening online currently as we speak, it's now sort of self-optimization, but what it really is the sustainability conversation mutated into something new.
And presumably just trying to drive that based on self-interest and the idea that
Absolutely. Like, don't care about other people on the planet.
worry about you.
You don't want to put that crap on your body, girl. It doesn't matter if a factory worker has to like touch it 700 times a day. It's about you.
It always is. Let me ask you about the solutions that are being touted to obviously this huge problem. At Davos, we're hearing a lot of buzzwords about the circular economy and technical fixes like fiber to fiber recycling. So first of all, for those who are not familiar with these terms, maybe help us understand what they're about. Is the focus on recycling at these summits kind of part of the solution? I mean, do you see these as positive conversations?
It's definitely part of the solution, but one of the things that my friends in Ghana always talk about is reparations as well. Like, it's great if we're coming up with the solutions for ourselves in the global north. What about the people that have been dumped on for the last 15 years? How are we factoring them into these solutions? And if you look at places like Cantonmento Market, they're already engaging with those solutions. The shirt I'm wearing today is by a brand called Nakoi, and it is a young woman in Ghana who literally rebuys shirts, patches them up, redyes them. That's the sort of stuff that we need to have, and we do have it on a very small scale in our society, but it is not competing with the 5 major high street brands that you see in every European city. And so yes, we need textile recycling desperately. We needed that like yesterday, but who's going to pay for it? Because it shouldn't actually be on the taxpayer when you've got these corporations that are making billions of dollars of profit, which probably brings you to another buzzword.
Yes, it does. The other buzzword we were hearing at Davos is extended producer responsibility, EPR. So apparently a way to make corporations pay for their waste. I think France has been experimenting with something, but it's really low. It's like 0.06 or something.
Yeah, I feel like the EU stuff, everybody was I was really excited about it, but I'm just like, are we doing it? I mean, I know that in some places it is happening, but it's always interesting the beginning of something new, like what the shakedown looks like. But I love a bit of EPR. I think that, yes, the producer should pay for it. Whether it is a little tax on every single fast fashion garment that goes into building an actual textile recycling system. I love that for us because I don't think that the consumer should have to pay for it. I think that the person making billions of dollars should have to pay for it. But, is it just talk? Are they actually serious about this? Like that's I feel like these conversations have been happening for a great many years, but like what's the follow through?
In 2024 to 2025, the gap between the minimum wage and the living wage in Bangladesh was still over 50%. And you've been on the record saying that if a brand can't pay its workers a dignified wage, it shouldn't exist, right?
Absolutely.
But if we mandated global north wages, say $15 to $20 an hour in a garment sector like Bangladesh, the minimum wage, which is currently $113 per month, the cost of production would skyrocket by about 2,000%. Wouldn't the factories just close? Is that better if they just close because the companies look at them and say, well, why would we pay garment workers in Bangladesh or Egypt or wherever else it may be? Well, might as well just pay this someone domestically and not ship them.
This is what people have to understand. Like nobody goes overseas to be altruistic. They go overseas to rip people off. Ultimately, I don't think that we should be mandating anything. I think that we should be supporting companies that already exist in these countries that do pay fair wages because they know what's best for their people and their workers. And so this idea that you can only really buy clothing from the same 5 brands on the high street is where we go wrong. There are so many brands that exist that produce in India and Bangladesh that are run by people that live in India and Bangladesh. There are brands in Ghana that exist that you can actually buy from. And I think in supporting the brands that exist in the markets where our stuff is made, we are actually sharing the power instead of mandating anything. I don't want to mandate. I don't want to tell someone in another country how they should live and, what should be done with these systems that are harming them because I don't know better than that person. But I do know that I can take my money and support a company in India that I really want to buy clothing from. And I've done that.
Let me ask you about greenwashing, which of course is the de rigueur term of the industry. For those who don't know what it is, this is obviously when brands make stuff look eco-friendly, but it's mostly smoke and mirrors.
It's when they put a leaf on like the swing tag and like a planet or something.
I
and
always
you're
feel
like,
so
what does
much
this
better
mean?
when I see that. Studies show that 60 to 96% of sustainability claims from big fashion companies are potentially misleading or unsubstantiated. One study found that almost all of H&M's sustainability claims were misleading, including other big names like ASOS and M&S. Now, because Gen Z does care about the planet, we know this obviously from polls and like culture.
By the way, previous years, like in Ghana, they collect all the clothing that washes up on the beach and then they take the tags and they count up how many tags they find. And this is actually very similar to how they figured out who was producing in Rana Plaza. They had to look for the clothing tags. Anyways, M&S came up as one of the top polluters of Ghana's beaches.
Well, so this is an example because I think, we won't single out individual brands for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But it just becomes really tricky because we as consumers are sold this idea of like an ethical consumption. And so we're just, in our busy lives, we're just looking for that like sticker with the green leaf or something. And how can we make better choices when the system itself is continuously tricking us about what it's actually doing?
Do you have to make a better choice on something you don't actually need? Again, I feel like people really overcomplicate. They go, oh, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to believe on this tag. And like, they're putting the cart before the horse because the first thing is, why are you buying a t-shirt if you've got an entire drawer of t-shirts at home?
I don't have that white t-shirt.
Exactly. It's that. I met someone once that said that they only wear tank tops once and then they throw them away. Oof. Honest to God.
People are watching this and they're thinking, I care about the climate. I'm conscious that the world is on fire, that things are going insane geopolitically. I want to be part of the solution, but I don't know where to start. Give us some kind of starting points for being part of the solution and still being able to feel connected to, wider culture without kind of completely opting out.
You got to quit the high street. You got to unsubscribe from those emails. You got to unfollow them on social media. You got to take those cookies off your phone. That's the first thing. The second thing, You have to start thinking about what it is that you actually need. If you actually care about fashion, get invested, learn the history, learn about the small niche brands that are making cool things that actually aren't that much more expensive than like Zara, because like Zara's not cheap. Everyone's like, it's fast fashion. Is it cheap? No. Last time I went in there, I was like shocked by those prices. Same with Anthropology and Free People, which always tricks people because they always think like, I thought that was an ethical brand. Surprise, it's not. Learn about the actual like history, learn about the small makers, learn about the local makers, learn about what goes into making your clothing. Slow down. You got to stop buying. Set an amount, track your shopping. That's what I do. I actually have a spreadsheet on my computer, and every time I buy something, I add it to the spreadsheet. And I have a certain amount of clothing that I'm allowed to buy per year. And then I also track what goes out of my wardrobe as well. And when I get ready to part with things, I now have to part with it in an ethical way. I will give to charity shops, but it will be designer goods that I know that they can sell quite quickly. I sell other things. I gift to friends. I do clothing swaps, but I do everything I can to keep the items in my clothing from becoming someone else's problem. I give to charities like Give Your Best. They allow refugees to come in and shop for free. So we have to start being more mindful, but that looks like slowing down. The first thing you got to do is you got to say, you know what? I'm just going to take a break. I'm not saying you can't ever go back to buying things, but stop buying things for like a month and see how you feel. I know it's scary. We've been trained to shop, but if you just do that for like a month and like take note of like when you feel encouraged to buy, the next time you see something you think, oh, I really want it, write it down, put it in like an app, and then come back to it later and decide if you really want it in like 3 weeks' time. By then, you might have even saved the money to buy it. You don't have to like wait for it to go on sale. But change yourself, change how you interact with this system before you make a purchase. I'm not saying you have to know what everything on the tag means, but you need to just start slowing down because then when it comes time to make a purchase, you might have a little bit more going on in your head than dopamine, you know?
Aja Barber, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If any of what we've discussed today has made you rethink or question your shopping habits, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to The Tea here on YouTube and follow us on Instagram and TikTok to stay up to date on all our content. And why not join us on Patreon, where you can access ad-free episodes, bonus content, and even have a say in what we cover next. Until next time, stay tuned for more tea. Thanks for tuning into The Tea. If this conversation resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. We love to hear from you. And remember to share our content with someone you think should hear it. And why not listen to these other episodes we think you'll love? Let's keep the conversation flowing.